Chosen ones welcome the anointed ones. Every secret, in the end, must choose a side, truth or destruction. And in your case, the secrets chose destruction, and they ravaged the very souls that created them. But before we plunge into the full unraveling, let's begin with something grounded in undeniable truth, something proven by researchers. The human mind can only hold so many lies before it begins to betray itself. Psychologists call it cognitive leakage. It's that moment when someone fights to maintain a facade, but the truth bursts forth like a prisoner escaping its cage. Let's be real. The ones who plotted against you weren't exactly master manipulators. No, they held their web of lies together with cheap emotional glue, hoping against hope that nothing would break. Spoiler alert, everything shattered. What makes this story so wild is how their downfall didn't come with quiet whispers or a graceful retreat. Before we continue this life-changing message, take a moment to pause like this video, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 voices of faith, and comment the number 99 to send a powerful signal of alignment to the universe. No, it was more like the crash of a phone screen face down on concrete, and in the chaos, they spilled everything, every secret meeting, every whispered scheme, every half-baked plan they concocted as if they were auditioning for a villain's role in a script nobody wanted. What they failed to understand, what they could never have anticipated, is that the universe has perfect timing and a cheeky sense of humor. There you were, just minding your business, surviving storms and leveling up while they scrambled in their back rooms, holding emergency meetings, trying to figure out why everything they plotted kept falling apart. They thought they were pulling the strings, controlling the narrative, and keeping you in the dark. Meanwhile, life was setting up a plot twist so sharp it tore through every lie they'd ever told. And here's the beauty of it. The truth didn't come out because you made it happen. No. The truth emerged because their own guilt reached its expiration date. Their alliance crumbled, their confidence disintegrated, their secret plans leaked like a bucket with 30 holes. It's ironic, really. People often think exposure happens when enemies get caught. But sometimes exposure comes when enemies grow weary. Weary of pretending, weary of covering for one another, weary of acting like a united front when, in reality, they couldn't even coordinate their own lives. By the time their secrets poured out, it wasn't even a surprise. It was poetry in motion. So hold tight, because what you're about to hear isn't just a tale of people fumbling in the dark. It's the story of how they were exposed by the very plot they thought would break you. And trust me, once we uncover what truly happened behind your back, you'll see exactly why they cracked the way they did. Let's start with the first truth. They never ever imagined you would outlive their narrative. The people who conspired against you weren't just after your downfall. No, they crafted an entire version of your future in their heads, a version where you stayed small, confused, overwhelmed, trapped in the wreckage they created. Their goal wasn't simply to sabotage your progress. It was to entrap you in a story that kept you predictable and powerless. They truly believed they held the pen to your fate. They didn't just want you to fail. They wanted to define your limits, to box you into a version of yourself that served their desires. What they couldn't fathom was your ability to grow beyond the environments that were meant to suffocate you. Their narrative relied on you staying stuck in emotional quicksand. They bet on you breaking down. They counted on you being too exhausted to fight for your own life. They thought you'd keep repeating the same cycles they pushed you into. Above all, they believed you were blind to the heavy influence they had on your path. Their confidence came from the assumption that you would never evolve beyond the version of yourself they manipulated you into being. But when you began to rise, when you began developing mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, when you started making choices from clarity, not from pain, that's when the very foundation of their plot crumbled. They never expected your rise. They never prepared for your healing. They couldn't imagine a world where you stopped seeing yourself through their judgment and started seeing yourself through the lens of truth. Your transformation became the plot twist that shattered their entire design. And that's why everything eventually came undone. When someone's manipulation no longer works, panic sets in. The lies don't stick. The alliances dissolve. The whispers lose their power. People begin to speak out because the storyline they worked so hard to control collapses the moment you step out of the box they tried to force you into. You outlived the version of yourself they needed to keep their power. And the moment you did that, you made their whole operation obsolete. And that's when the truth comes spilling out. Not because they grew honest, but because their plan ran out of oxygen the moment you reclaimed your narrative. And this leads us to the second truth. Their guilt became louder than their lies. When people plot against you, They often believe they can outrun their own conscience. They convince themselves that if they stay committed to the story, keep repeating it, keep defending it, the lie will eventually become their truth. But guilt is crafty. It doesn't announce itself at first. It slips in quietly, like pressure building under the floorboards, and before long, it becomes too heavy to hide. That's exactly what happened to the ones who targeted you. They didn't confess because they suddenly grew noble or morally enlightened. No, they confessed because the weight of what they did began crushing every part of them. Guilt doesn't hit all at once. It begins as small cracks, trouble sleeping, shaky nerves, overthinking every conversation, avoiding people who know too much, and then it escalates. Anxiety creeps in unexpectedly. The fear of being exposed gnaws at them. Paranoia sets in, thinking that everyone sees right through their facade. They rehearse their lies so often that it exhausts them mentally. Sooner or later, their guilt becomes stronger than their ability to pretend. That's when the truth slips out, sometimes in fragments, sometimes all at once. People underestimate how loud guilt can be. It interrupts their thoughts, disrupts their decision-making, and makes them overreact to things that once felt normal. The guilt of what they did to you became a constant reminder that the story they were pushing was built on jealousy, insecurity, and manipulation. And when they realized they could no longer drown out the mental noise, they cracked wide open. You didn't need to confront them. You didn't need to expose them. Their own conscience became the spotlight they could not escape. And here's the deeper truth. They were never prepared for the emotional cost of tearing down an innocent person. They thought their lies would last forever, but guilt, like an interest payment on wrongdoing, becomes too expensive to maintain. That's why everything spilled. The lies they clung to couldn't stand against the relentless weight of their own guilt. And once guilt began speaking, it refused to be silenced. Now, we come to the third truth. Their plot became useless the moment you grew. The biggest mistake they made was underestimating your ability to rise above what they threw at you. Every plan, every scheme, every calculated move was based on the belief that you would remain broken, that you would stay vulnerable, and that their efforts would eventually matter. They treated you like a chess piece, believing they could manipulate your every move. But they didn't account for one crucial thing: your growth. Growth changes everything. It breaks systems. It makes every plot, every manipulation, and every secret effort irrelevant. As you evolved mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, their strategies lost their power. The lies that were meant to trap you suddenly felt hollow. The people who carried out their plans realized it was pointless because the target they had planned for no longer existed. You were no longer the person they expected to see, the one who would stumble at every obstacle. You became unpredictable to them, untouchable, unstoppable. Their operation, once thought to be clever and meticulously planned, became nothing more than wasted energy and embarrassing miscalculations. When a plot becomes useless, cracks start to appear. People begin pointing fingers, mistakes accumulate, and the original plan collapses under its own weight. They try to cover their tracks, they try to salvage their control, they try to intimidate you, but it's all irrelevant now. You've grown beyond their reach. You've evolved beyond their influence. The very thing they thought would crush you is the very thing that exposed them. This is why the truth spilled. They had no leverage left, no power to manipulate, no reason to keep the secret alive. Their plan, which they believed was strong enough to break you, had already been rendered obsolete. And when they realized their plot was useless, they panicked and confessed. You didn't have to fight. They were defeated simply because you outgrew the battlefield they thought they controlled. Growth, in this case, became the silent weapon that destroyed their entire operation. This leads us to number 4. Someone in their circle decided you were too pure to destroy. Not everyone in their group was as cold-hearted as they appeared. Somewhere within the very ranks of those who conspired against you, there was at least one person who couldn't ignore the truth any longer. They witnessed the injustice unfolding. They saw the cruelty, the manipulation, and the harm being inflicted upon you. And they couldn't bear it. They realized that no matter how much the others tried to damage you, your integrity, your strength, and your clarity remained untouchable. You weren't just surviving anymore. You were thriving in a way that made the whole scheme impossible to justify. Your resilience, your purity, Your unshakable spirit rendered their actions not just wrong but unsustainable. And for that reason alone, someone chose to break the silence and step off the sidelines. It's fascinating how this works. People who plot against others often operate within delusions, convinced that their alliances are unbreakable. But alliances built on fear, jealousy, and insecurity always have cracks. And within those cracks, conscience can slip in. That's exactly what happened here. Someone quietly watched the events unfold and decided, enough is enough. They weren't motivated by loyalty to you, at least not in the obvious way. They were motivated by recognition, the recognition of your worth, the recognition of your unyielding spirit, and the realization that what was happening to you was not just wrong, but unsustainable. This is where the plot begins to unravel. When someone in the inner circle decides that morality outweighs loyalty to a scheme, the entire web of lies becomes unstable. Whispers turn into confessions, secrets become evidence, and the manipulators, who once thought they controlled everything, suddenly realize their grip is slipping. You didn't need to expose them, threaten them, or outwit them. They exposed themselves because one person with a clear conscience couldn't bear to see you crushed any longer. And what makes it even more powerful is that this decision didn't come from weakness, came from clarity. Someone finally understood the difference between what was easy and what was right, and their decision to act sparked a chain reaction. The plot that once seemed so secure crumbled because they underestimated the power of human conscience. Your purity, your resilience, and your silent strength were enough to ignite that awakening. And that awakening cracked the entire operation. Now, number 5, they realized you were the wrong person to bet against. At some point, they stopped seeing you as a target and began seeing you as a force they could never contain. The moment they realized that every plan, every lie, every manipulation had failed to break you, panic set in. They began to understand that they weren't just dealing with someone who could be pushed around. They were facing someone who would rise no matter the pressure. Someone whose strength, clarity, and resilience outmatched their cruelty. That realization, for them, was terrifying. It flipped the entire power dynamic. The hunter became the hunted. The plot collapsed under its own weight, and fear replaced the arrogance that had once fueled their every move. This isn't about you being strong in a vague, abstract sense. It's about the undeniable fact that their calculations were flawed from the start. They assumed you could be controlled. They assumed your reactions were predictable. They thought they could weaponize your pain. Every assumption they made was rooted in underestimating you, and that underestimation was their undoing. They watched, helpless, as your life kept moving forward. Your mind stayed sharp. Your spirit refused to bend. Every small victory you claimed made their plan weaker. With each failed attempt to manipulate you, their confidence crumbled. Fear has a way of forcing honesty. The moment they realized they had chosen the wrong person to bet against, their panic made them spill pieces of the truth they had worked so hard to conceal. Their confessions weren't about admitting wrongdoing. No, they were about self-preservation. They realized that continuing to fight against you would only escalate the risk they faced. The wrong person, after all, is never the one who bends. They are the one who exposes everything intentionally or not simply by existing, refusing to comply with the story they tried to craft for you. By the time the truth came out, they were trapped by their own misjudgment. Their arrogance, their scheming, their sense of control all evaporated the moment they realized the magnitude of your presence. You weren't just untouchable, you were their miscalculation. That realization alone shattered the very foundation of everything they had plotted. And with it, we reach number 6. Your silence made their actions echo. One of the most dangerous things you did, without even realizing it, was remain silent while they worked tirelessly to destroy you. Every insult, every scheme, every whispered plan they plotted against you only amplified in the wake of your calm, silent endurance. People who plot against others thrive on reactions. They live for chaos, fear, anger, and confusion. They want to see flinches, emotional breakdowns, hesitation, anything that lets them feel they still control the narrative. But your silence denied them that satisfaction. It didn't make you weak. It made their lies louder. Every word they whispered, every action they took suddenly existed in a vacuum where no one could hide from the consequences of their behavior. By not reacting, you forced the truth to speak for itself. Their manipulations, once carefully hidden, became painfully obvious when you didn't give them the reaction they craved. Lies that were meant to confuse you became glaringly transparent. The energy you gave, or more accurately, didn't give acted like a spotlight, highlighting the cracks in their facade they worked so hard to conceal. You weren't fighting, arguing, or justifying yourself. You were simply living your life, standing firm, and letting their actions reflect exactly what they were. Silence, in this case, wasn't absence. It was strategy, whether instinctual or intentional, and it made their guilt, fear, and incompetence impossible to ignore. And here's what makes it truly extraordinary. Your quietness forced them to confront themselves. Without your reaction, they couldn't manipulate reality in their favor. Every conversation, every secret meeting, every deceitful alliance they formed became evidence of their failure. Their lies had nowhere to hide because you were the calm center in the storm they thought they controlled. In the end, your silence didn't just protect you, it revealed them. It exposed their desperation, their nerves, and their eventual breakdown. It forced confessions, slips of the tongue, and the unraveling of the entire plot. They underestimated your power to stand still, to endure, and to let the truth do the heavy lifting. And when the dust finally settled, it was clear. You didn't need to fight for justice, argue for clarity, or expose them yourself. Your silence did it all, echoing louder than any words ever could. Now, number 7, they couldn't keep the story straight anymore. Lies are fragile. They can only survive when everyone involved remembers their place, repeats the same lines, and keeps the act consistent. The people plotting against you never realized that plotting against someone sharp and aware comes with a built-in time bomb. The longer they tried to control the narrative, the more impossible it became to maintain. Every additional layer of deception required precision, and precision was never their strong suit. They fumbled with details, contradicted each other, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, their story began to unravel. When a plot relies on multiple people, the first crack always appears in memory. Who said what? Who knew what? Who was supposed to cover for whom? It starts small. Someone mixes up a meeting, someone exaggerates, someone forgets the timing. But those small mistakes accumulate like snow building up in an avalanche. Eventually, the plotters find themselves trapped by the very lies they created. They have to lie to cover the previous lies, and each new lie adds pressure until the entire story becomes unmanageable. This is exactly how their operation collapsed. The plot was never just about hurting you. It was a performance, a fragile illusion held together by fear and coordination. But fear alone doesn't fix bad memory, poor planning, or conflicting egos. Once one person slipped up, the others followed either out of panic or because they were trying to patch a hole in the web of deception. The inconsistencies became glaring, and soon enough, the lies were louder than their control. That's when the truth started spilling out. They didn't confess because they wanted to. They confessed because they had no choice. The story had become unmanageable, and every attempt to hold it together only made it worse. Their fear, their stress, and their inability to keep track of their own fiction forced them to break. In the end, the very structure they built to trap you became the very thing that exposed them. Their collapse wasn't dramatic, it was inevitable. Lies are like sandcastles. You can only hold them together for so long before the tide of reality washes them away. And that brings us to number 8. Their plot couldn't survive your energy. There's a kind of power that doesn't need words, actions, or confrontation. It simply exists. Your energy, the way you carried yourself, the way you navigated life despite all the obstacles thrown at you, became a force they couldn't reckon with. They didn't realize that the strength of someone who refuses to be broken isn't just invisible, it's contagious, magnetic, and most importantly, revealing. Every move they made to control, manipulate, or sabotage you was countered, not with resistance, but with the quiet intensity of your presence. Your energy shone so brightly that their lies and schemes were impossible to hide. They tried to keep the plot tight, coordinated, and secret, but energy has a way of exposing weakness. Your consistency, your calm amidst chaos, and your refusal to feed into their manipulations made them uncomfortable. They could see the gap between who they thought you were and who you truly were. Every manipulation they attempted reflected back on them because you carried a frequency they couldn't touch, a clarity they couldn't distort. They tried to ignore it. They tried to push harder. They tried to recruit others into their plan. But the more they struggled, the more transparent their actions became. Energy like yours doesn't just protect, it exposes. People around you began noticing inconsistencies. Rumors lost their weight, alliances weakened, and eventually, the pressure of being seen for what they truly were became unbearable. They spilled everything because the tension created by your unwavering energy made it impossible to keep the charade going. You didn't have to confront anyone. Your life, your demeanor, your strength simply existing forced the cracks to appear naturally. And that's what makes it so devastating for them. They realized too late that the very thing they tried to manipulate your energy had already revealed the truth. Your energy didn't just outshine their lies. It dismantled the entire foundation of their plot. It forced exposure without a single word, without a fight, and without a dramatic confrontation. Their failure wasn't because of evidence, clever moves, or pressure. It was because your energy, consistent and unyielding, left no room for deception to survive. Now, number 9, they finally understood that you saw more than you spoke. From the very beginning, they assumed you could be deceived, distracted, and controlled. They mistook your silence for weakness. What they didn't realize was that while you weren't speaking, you were observing, analyzing, and cataloging every move they made. Every lie, every scheme, every attempt to manipulate or undermine you was recorded in your mind. You didn't need to respond, argue, or retaliate. Your awareness itself was a silent witness to everything. And that awareness is terrifying for people who build their power on secrecy. They eventually realized that no amount of deception could survive in front of someone who notices everything. It's easy to underestimate the power of someone who doesn't react. They thought your calmness meant ignorance. They thought your patience meant passivity. They assumed that the more you held back, the more opportunities they had to control the narrative. But as time passed, they began to sense that their carefully constructed lies weren't landing the way they expected. Small things they said in private contradicted each other. Their stories didn't line up, and their confidence began to falter. The silence that once seemed like compliance suddenly became a mirror, reflecting their dishonesty and incompetence in full view. And that mirror is what made them crack. They realized you were never naive, never blind, and never easily fooled. You had always seen more than they could handle, more than they were willing to admit, and certainly more than they could control. Once that realization hit, panic set in. Lies began spilling out. Alliances faltered. The plot that had been tightly held together for months or even years started collapsing from the inside. The truth didn't come out because you demanded it, confronted it, or exposed it. It came out because they finally understood that no matter how much they manipulated words, actions, or circumstances, you had already seen everything. You were too aware, too perceptive, and too grounded for their plot to remain intact. The weight of being seen in full light is unbearable for someone who thrives in darkness, and that is exactly what forced them to break and spill it all. Number 10, the person they trusted the most became their weakest link. Every group that plots against someone has at least one person they believe is untouchable, the one they think is the smartest, the most loyal, or the most careful. Ironically, that person is almost always the one who ends up being the weakest link. In their arrogance, they placed too much faith in someone who couldn't handle the pressure, someone whose ego or nerves were larger than their sense of loyalty. That person becomes the crack in the armor, the point where the carefully constructed plot begins to unravel. The dynamic is both brutal and inevitable. When you're plotting against someone, you rely on everyone to keep secrets perfectly, to remember all the lies, and to cover up each other's mistakes without flaw. But humans aren't perfect. Even the most loyal accomplice has limits. Stress, fear, guilt, or even simple overconfidence can push them over the edge. Once that weak link begins to falter, the entire operation becomes unstable. Lies slip through, inconsistencies emerge, and the tension between the plotters grows so intense that the story they tried to control begins to unravel at lightning speed. This is exactly how your enemy's plan collapsed. The person they trusted the most, the one they believed would never crack, was the first to stumble. Maybe they were nervous, maybe their conscience spoke too loudly, or maybe they simply got caught in their own web of lies. Whatever the reason, their failure triggered a chain reaction. Confessions started leaking, mistakes became obvious, and the rest of the conspirators began panicking. Their plan, which had seemed airtight, crumbled because it relied on one person who couldn't hold the weight of the deception. By the time the truth came out, it wasn't just a slip-up, it was a full-scale collapse. Their confidence, their control, their power evaporated because they placed too much trust in the wrong person. And that weak link, the one they believed was their secret weapon, became the very instrument of their exposure. The lesson is clear. In any plot built on deception, the greatest vulnerability is always the person who believes they are untouchable. Because in reality, that is exactly the person who will break first. Number 11. They thought you were isolated, but you were observed by higher forces. One of the biggest mistakes they made was assuming you were alone, that no one was watching over you, and that the chaos they orchestrated would go unnoticed. They acted as though your life was a blank canvas they could deface without consequence, as if every move they made could stay hidden in the shadows. What they didn't realize is that forces beyond their comprehension were quietly observing everything, tracking every scheme, every manipulation, every attempt to harm you. It wasn't about luck or coincidence. It was about timing, alignment, and the inevitable justice that always catches up with those who act in darkness. The irony is brutal. They were meticulous, believing their planning and coordination made them untouchable. They thought secrecy was their armor, but they underestimated something much bigger. The universe, or whatever higher system governs the balance of actions and consequences, has its own way of recording, noticing, and acting. Every deception, every whisper, every attempt to twist reality against you was being observed in ways they couldn't see. And that observation wasn't passive. It set the stage for exposure. That's why their plot couldn't hold. The more they tried to manipulate events and control outcomes, the more the higher forces allowed inconsistencies to accumulate. Small slips, contradictory stories, and nervous behaviors were magnified and amplified, eventually becoming impossible to ignore. By the time the confession came, it wasn't a surprise. It was inevitable. What they assumed was secrecy became their undoing because someone or something was always watching, always timing, always waiting for the right moment to expose the full truth. And that's the deeper lesson they could never grasp. No matter how smart, sneaky, or cruel someone thinks they are, being in the wrong against the right person attracts scrutiny beyond human vision. Their arrogance made them blind, and that blindness allowed their actions to be fully revealed. You weren't alone. You weren't powerless. And the moment they tried to destroy you, higher forces ensured that their own deception became their downfall. Every confession, every leak, every unraveling was proof that someone or something was quietly keeping score. Number 12, they confessed because they needed an exit strategy. The moment they realized that continuing the plot against you was more dangerous than walking away, panic set in. People rarely spill secrets out of morality. They spill them when they see the walls closing in and suddenly realize they need a way out. That's exactly what happened here. The plotters didn't confess out of kindness or remorse. They confessed because survival instincts kicked in. The entire operation they built to control, manipulate, and harm you became a liability. And the only way to protect themselves was to start talking. When someone invests so much energy into a scheme, they convince themselves that it's safe. They believe that loyalty within their circle, fear, and careful deception will protect them. But once cracks begin to form, whether from the person they trusted most, an unexpected conscience in their circle, or even their own slipping memory, they find themselves backed into a corner. Suddenly, the narrative they thought was untouchable starts to collapse, and the consequences of continuing in silence become far worse than admitting pieces of the truth. Their confession isn't courage, it's calculation. They begin releasing information strategically, hoping to minimize the damage while appearing cooperative, hoping to secure an exit before the full weight of their misdeeds catches up with them. What's fascinating is how desperation exposes everything. When they start thinking about self-preservation, the careful choreography of lies becomes impossible to maintain. Details they thought buried leak out. Alliances crumble. Inconsistencies explode. The exit strategy, which starts as a whisper in private, quickly turns into a flood. And all the while, they are frantically trying to protect themselves from the fallout they created, which ironically exposes the entire plot faster than any investigation or confrontation could. In the end, the confession is as much about them as it is about you. They realized too late that the game they started wasn't winnable, that their choices had trapped them, and that continuing to hide the truth was a risk too big to take. Their need to escape forced the story into the open, spilling everything they tried to keep secret. You didn't need to confront them. Their survival instinct did it for you. Number 13, your resilience made them realize they were fighting destiny. They weren't just targeting you, they were trying to fight against a force they didn't understand. Every plot, every manipulation, every backhanded plan they created was meant to control your path. But they underestimated one crucial fact: your life wasn't theirs to dictate. Your resilience, your ability to endure, adapt, and rise no matter what they threw at you, shattered their sense of control. It wasn't that you were lucky or that things just worked out. It was that their entire scheme collided with something far greater than their understanding destiny, timing, and the undeniable strength of someone who refuses to be broken. As they watched, panic grew. Their whispers, strategies, and alliances, which were meant to intimidate and weaken you, had the opposite effect. The more they tried to force a narrative, the more it became clear that you were untouchable in ways they could never explain. Every attack, every lie, every betrayal became fuel for your growth rather than a weapon against you. And the deeper they realized this, the more desperate and reckless they became. The very person they thought they could crush was, in fact, moving exactly where they were meant to be, unfolding exactly how they were destined to unfold. This realization is what forces people to spill secrets. When someone recognizes they are fighting a purpose or a calling, panic replaces confidence. They don't just fear failure, they fear consequences that extend beyond human retaliation. Their entire plot began to crumble under the weight of inevitability. They could no longer hold the facade because reality, your resilience, and the undeniable momentum of destiny were all pointing to the truth. By the time everything came out, it wasn't because of your confrontation or exposure. It was because they realized they were fighting against something far bigger than themselves. Your survival, your growth, and your unshakable spirit made them understand that they weren't just failing. They were losing against destiny itself. And in that moment of fear and realization, everything they tried to hide came pouring out, leaving no part of their plan untouched, no secret unrevealed, and no lie unexposed. Number 14. They finally saw themselves through the mirror you never held. The moment the truth spilled, it wasn't just about exposing their plot against you. It was about forcing them to confront themselves. All the scheming, manipulation, and hidden agendas were eventually reflected back in a way they could no longer ignore. They had always assumed that by controlling your life, controlling your reactions, and controlling the narrative, they could remain untouchable. But the irony is brutal. Their own actions became the mirror, and they couldn't escape the reflection. Every lie, every betrayal, every strategy they thought was secret was suddenly undeniable. And the person staring back at them was far worse than anyone else could have shown them. This is the turning point where arrogance meets reality. They weren't just exposed to you, they were exposed to themselves. For the first time, they saw the consequences of their choices, the magnitude of their cruelty, and the absolute futility of their efforts. The plot they designed to control and harm someone else became the evidence of their own moral bankruptcy. And that realization is devastating because it's intimate and unavoidable. They couldn't blame circumstances, other people, or accidents anymore. The reflection was theirs and theirs alone. That's why the confession came spilling out. They weren't confessing to you. They were confessing to themselves in the most public and undeniable way possible. Panic and shame became the channels through which the truth was revealed. Because once you become aware of your own failures and malice, hiding them becomes impossible. The mirror forces honesty, whether one wants it or not, and in their case, it forced exposure. By the time the entire plot was revealed, it was clear that what broke them wasn't confrontation. It was self-recognition. They finally understood who they were in the full light of their own deception. And the irony is that this revelation didn't just destroy their plot. It dismantled the narrative they had built about them. Their identity as schemers, manipulators, and victors in their own story evaporated the moment they saw the truth in themselves. You didn't need to hold the mirror. They held it, and it shattered under the weight of the truth. Conclusion: what all of this reveals is far deeper than a simple story of betrayal and exposure. It's a blueprint of what happens when the truth meets resilience, clarity, and timing. Every plot, every scheme, every secret plan they thought would destroy you didn't just fail. It backfired in ways they could never anticipate. They cracked because they underestimated your ability to survive and outgrow their manipulation. They spilled everything because guilt, fear, and self-preservation overtook the lies they had built their entire operation on. Every move they made was mirrored back by your presence, your awareness, and your unwavering strength, exposing not just their intentions, but their very nature. From the moment you refused to play the role they scripted for you, you to the moment your silence and resilience forced their lies into the open. The story unfolded like a lesson written in plain sight. They never expected you to outlive their storyline. They couldn't comprehend that your growth, your energy, your integrity, and even the quiet observation you maintained would dismantle their plans without a single confrontation. The people who thought they controlled the narrative discovered that their arrogance, overconfidence, and moral weakness were their own undoing. Every confession, every spill of truth, every collapse of the plot was inevitable. Not because of luck, but because truth and resilience are forces that cannot be contained, manipulated, or destroyed. And the most extraordinary part, you didn't have to fight. You didn't have to prove anything or chase justice. Everything they tried to hide, every strategy they carefully orchestrated, came crashing down simply because they were not ready to face you. Not ready to face the consequences of their actions, and not ready to see themselves through the reflection you reveal. The story that unfolded is proof that integrity, awareness, and unshakable growth will always expose deception, no matter how carefully it is hidden. If this breakdown hit you hard and gave you clarity on just how unstoppable truth and resilience are, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss these eye-opening revelations. Like this video if it gave you chills.